Good morning. Hey, welcome to Elevenses with Lisa. I'm Lisa. I'm Lisa Louise Cooke. And you're in the right spot if you're looking for kind of a nice break to your day. Now, 11s is kind of traditional tea time around the world. So it's 11 o'clock a.m. Central here for the live show. But whatever time it is for you, I am so happy that you're here. We've got kind of an interesting topic today, and it's one that you might have heard or touched on, particularly if you've gone to a genealogy conference. It's a little more, I guess you call it on the academic side, but we're not going to talk about it academically. We're going to talk about it real life. We're going to talk about the story behind your records, the genealogy records that you're working with. And really, gosh, if you don't know the story behind them, then you're actually missing part of your own family's story. So we're going to just dig into that today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and comments here on the live show. And of course, if you're watching the video replay, awesome. Leave comments down below the video or on the show notes page at the bottom of the show notes page. So did you see we're all decorated for Christmas? I'm so excited. Okay, so let's jump into this. And of course, I didn't even put my thing on the right screen here. There we go. Okay. So, genealogy. Hey, great genealogy. It requires a great understanding of the story that's behind the records that you're using. Have you thought about why these things even exist, or who put them together, or who was providing the information? This is all really important stuff when it comes to how you're going to use them, how you're going to interpret them, and how you're going to kind of understand what they mean for you in terms of your own family history research. So the story behind your records, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about something called provenance, which is kind of the history behind the record that you have. And we're going to talk about objects too, because, if you're lucky enough to have maybe a family heirloom or two, there's a story there as well. So we're talking about where this thing came from and the reason for the record. Why was it created? And sometimes that has nothing to do with your ancestor. In fact, I'd say most of the time. And then we'll talk about your ancestors, the information source. And particularly when the informant is giving the information, is that information primary? Or is it secondary? We'll talk about that. If those are new terms for you, this is really, really important. And of course, it's a great reminder for all of us who have been doing genealogy research for a while. And we're going to talk about those informants, those people who are giving the information. Now, they might be your ancestor. They might be somebody completely outside of your family. But we need to get ourselves in their heads, and we need to think about what's motivating them. What are the motivating factors? And if it's perhaps an authority, a governmental agency, if it's somebody else who's creating this record, they have their own motivations, right? And then your ancestor may have their own motivations for the information that they're providing to put into that record. So this is all really important stuff to understand that complete story. And I mentioned provenance. So in the art world, knowing the provenance of a piece is really crucial to understanding its value. You have to know, where did this thing come from? What's the chain of custody? Is it authentic, right? And provenance looks at an object's origins, its history, and its ownership, that chain of custody we're talking about. So investigating and analyzing the provenance of a piece really sheds light on whether it's authentic, whether it's truly created by the attributed artist in the stated time frame that they're saying that it was, and what the value of the item might be. We've all heard stories about these art pieces that get forged, or somebody creates something that looks exactly like it, and then they sell it for millions of dollars, and it turns out it's not the real deal. I think this is a Rembrandt that I have here on the screen. Love his work. And, if it's not a real Rembrandt, that makes a whole different ballgame. In fact, I remember we were touring some of the old houses in England. I guess, was it 2019? Seems like eons ago, doesn't it? Anyway, we're going through this amazing grand house, and they had all these art pieces, and I see a portrait kind of like this, but it was of a man, and it was in the back closet of the main master bedroom. And I was like, oh, is that just kind of the leftover art, the stuff that you don't display? And they're like, no, that's a Rembrandt. So I don't know why it was in the back closet, but it was amazing, and they had all the paperwork on it. So it's important to understand what all of this background information is in order to really determine if it's legitimate. Well, this principle, it applies to your genealogical records too. So we need to look at our sources and be thinking about this kind of stuff to really understand if it's something that we can trust. So that's the story behind the records that we're working with. Provenance it's important because it helps us determine how much weight to give the information. And that's where we start getting into the secondary, primary area. And we'll talk more specifically about that. But every document we get, it's easy to just be excited that you found it, right? So you're collecting these documents, you're getting digital records online, and you're thinking, it starts to all look the same, but it's not. They are absolutely not. So we'll dig into this to help you kind of determine the differences. So let's think about some of the questions that we could ask. And it's interesting because as I'm looking at records, my tendency is always to ask the questions about my ancestor. What is this going to answer for me? Without first asking the question, is this legitimate? Is this authentic? Is it authoritative? Can I really, really trust it? So before we start asking, what does this mean in my family? We need to ask, what does this record mean? What is the story behind it? So one of the first questions that you could be asking is when and where the record was created. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for records that are created closest to the time of the event. Okay, because if it's close to when this thing actually happened, that it's documenting, then it's far more likely to be correct. I mean, I watch some of the true life criminal cases on TV, and it's amazing how off a witness testimony can be, particularly a year or two down the road. So you want to try to get that information the moment something happens to get the most accurate picture of what's happening. And documents created in places associated with your relatives. So if this is a federal record that's created in Washington, D.C., but it happens to be about your ancestor in Indiana, it'd be really nice to get some records specifically created in Indiana as well, wouldn't it? So just be thinking about where this is being created and how related that is to your family. And we're also looking for documents created by people who knew them or who were authorities on the topic being documented. So we'll look at some of the informants. That's the informant word that we hear. And these are the people providing the information on the genealogical records that we're using. And so if they know our ancestor, they're going to know more about them. And depending on how close that relationship is, right? For those of you watching live, I'd be really interested, have you toss in the chat, in our live chat, if you've ever found a document that you determined actually wasn't authentic or wasn't accurate for really one of these key reasons. It'd be really interesting to share some of those experiences. And of course, if you have a question along the way, put it in the chat. And if you can put big, bold letters, question, Bill sometimes spots those and can flag them to me if they happen earlier here in the show. And I'll be looking at those at the end of the show as well, see if I can help out. So one of the things that you can do to answer some of these questions that we're posing, because we can't talk to the people most of the times who've created these records, is we can look and see at the provider who's giving us the record, what are they able to tell us about it? And when you use a website like Ancestry, it's really, again, easy to stay focused on just the search fields and the results list, and you're looking at the records. But they actually provide a lot of information, as do most of the genealogy sites. They'll have some background. You might have to dig for it a little bit, but it's important. So here we're looking at what is this? The 1900 census record for Harold Lloyd. I'm an absolute silent film fanatic. I love old silent films, watch them all the time. Hey, if you need a break from 2020, go watch a silent film on YouTube. You will laugh and your mind just you're so focused because they're not talking out loud. You got to watch the subtitles. It's awfully fun. And so I was looking him up in the 1900 census. And if you scroll down a little bit under any census result that you get, you're going to see the source citation. Really important stuff. Now, it's easy to ignore this because you're thinking, oh, this is the 1900 census. So maybe I already know about the census. I don't have to worry about that. But there's a lot of information here, actually. And if you're fairly new to genealogy, take the time to read some of this. Not only will you find the source citation, which is going to be really helpful to you in documenting this find in your genealogy software, but also if you go down a little bit, they'll give you a description. Super handy if you're getting into a record collection that you're not as familiar with. And I want to alert you that down here at the bottom, if you look carefully, sometimes there'll be a link. There's a whole lot more. Okay, so lots of background. These genealogy companies, when they're collecting the records, have this amazing opportunity to talk to the people who house the records and get some of this background, maybe get some of the information off the finding aids and include them here if you're willing to take a couple extra seconds to click through and check them out. So review all the available source information. It's there for you, and it can really give you insight into why this record's being created, who's making it, what's the time frame, what's the purpose of it, right? Those are all important things. Talking about the census. Gosh, census.gov is the United States Census website. And if you've listened to my Genealogy Gems podcast, you've heard Profile America, which has little tidbits in history, and those come from census.gov. This site is terrific for learning more about the U.S. Census records. I'm sure in Canada, if you go to the National Archives, you're going to find information there as well. I love this page. I'm going to have a link to this page in the show notes because this is really important. It has all of the enumeration instructions. So if you were going to be an enumerator for the census, you got this big instruction booklet, to explain to you how to go house to house and in what order and the whole thing, what to ask people, who to ask. This is all documented. And all of these enumerator instructions are available here on the website. If you run into something, particularly those little markings, numbers, things you're thinking, what does that mean? Many times you can get the answer to that in the enumerator instructions. They had to put it there. They had to know what it meant, and that's where you can find out. Another terrific way to find out what a collection is about and the background behind it is, for instance, if you're at an archive, ask for the finding aids for the collection that you're spending time on. Review them, and you're going to learn so much about these documents that you're looking at. And there are finding aids online as well. But particularly, I think, when you're in a location, in a repository, and you're kind of busy trying to make your way through, ask for them. Oftentimes, they'll even just give you a copy of a finding aid, or they'll have a digital version of it on their website. The finding aid is going to tell you the provenance of the item itself, the collection, and how the materials were used originally, which I think is important to know because then it kind of explains why they are the way they are. It's going to really describe the contents and the physical characteristics, what you should be seeing, particularly if you're looking at objects, but also record collections. It's going to also tell you if there's any restrictions on using these items, so that's important to know. And the scope. So it's really tempting to think, oh, this just covers everything I need because it's about the census or it's about, birth records, but that may not be the scope. The scope may be actually fairly narrow based on what the purpose of it was originally. So it's kind of alerting to you to what might not be there. And what's not there is as important as what's there. right? And I've even got kind of an example for you in a few minutes about being able to see the full picture, because it's important to know what you're not seeing as well as what you are seeing. It gives it context. So the scope, what it covers, the contents, notes, summary, evaluations, and they have a box or file list. So the finding aids are super helpful. And we talked about them. If you'll remember in episode 31, we were talking about the Allen County Public Library and their Genealogy Center. Allison was telling us about the finding aids, and they have wonderful finding aids on their website. Great example of that. For those of you who are premium members, check out Premium Podcast episode 149. And even if you're not a big podcast listener, there's a full article there for you as well, the show notes page. And there, Melissa Barker, who is an archivist in Tennessee, she talked about finding aids, using them, and how they work in an archive. So great resource. Melissa's very, very knowledgeable and can help you with finding aids. The episode 31 of Elevenses with Lisa is available at our website. So you go to genealogygems.com and in the menu, click Elevenses and go through, and you can see all the current free episodes there and click through on episode 31. And this importance about the story behind the records, this is it holds true for objects as well. When we talked about this in our family Bible episode number 29. So objects that are passed down through the family, it could be a family Bible, it could be a transcript of a reminiscence, it could be something that you find online. These items also have a history. And check out episode 29 if maybe you have a family Bible in your family. And we talked a little bit about how to look at what you're seeing there and analyze it and understand whether it was written after the fact or whether you think it was more likely to have been the births and deaths and marriages were recorded at the time that they actually happened. Lots of great tips there. Okay, so the story behind the records, whenever possible, consider a source as a whole. And the finding aid talked about that, didn't it? What is the scope? What is the whole collection? Sometimes we're looking at one document. This is the one about our family, but seeing it as a whole can give us more perspective. It's really tempting to kind of want to zero in on just the paragraphs about our family or just the photos in an album that pertain to our family. Maybe you've met a distant cousin through a connection and they're showing you and you're just really focused on your family members, but they're in there, they're part of something bigger, and there is a story there, and there must be connections there. And the whole book, even if there are people that you don't know or aren't directly in your family tree, they are part of your ancestors' story. So you don't want to miss out on the important information that changes what the source has to tell you. And I think photo albums are a great easy physical example of that, but this is really true in so many cases. In a photo album, just the very specific placement of a photograph in that album, that can be really significant, and it can be as significant as the printed photographic image itself. I've discovered that in my own great-grandmother's photo album. Just there seemed to be a rhyme and reason as to how that album was laid out and the order in which things happened. It seemed to be fairly chronological. And a photo's position, even on the page, can indicate the relationship of the people in the photos in other photos on that page. I found this a lot in my Mansfield photo album on Bill's side of the family. And it can, like I said, give you a literal timeline of events. It also may have been created way after the fact, maybe by somebody who didn't even know these people as well. Maybe it's a generation later. So when you see kind of a hodgepodge, now you have a question to ask. Maybe this got put together later. And even just the type of book it is, right? It's one of those magnetic, those terrible 1970s magnetic albums. Have you had those? I'm still trying to, get stuff out of there. But that but with old pictures. I mean, everything tells part of the story to help you date things and determine how strong the relationships are between the people in the photos. If it's this kind of put together, the next generation down, maybe that person wasn't as on top of the ball as far as how these people were connected to each other and the order in which these events might have happened in the family. And another, I think, really important question to ask is, does it appear complete? Now, that's true whether it's a photo album or even a collection in an archive. Again, what's missing? And what does that tell you? So take note if any part of the source appears to be missing or illegible, especially if it appears that some of it has been deliberately moved, erased, or crossed out. Those things all tell us a little something. In fact, I have some examples of that. You might be able to make more sense of the partial information that's there, or at least guess why is some of this missing. This photograph is from my grandmother's album. It's funny. I was reading through her diaries later. I think I can almost tell you the date that she ripped the face off my grandfather. This is before they were married. I think they were dating in the 1930s. And I'm looking at this picture and I'm following the chronology of it, how it falls in the scrapbook. And I went through her diaries and I found this fight that they had. Yeah. So I wrote his name on there. That's me. I wrote that. I probably shouldn't have touched it, but I just wanted people to know who was there at one point. So there might have been a perfectly innocent reason for the change that you find, for the omission that's there. But you may also be seeing evidence that someone who wanted to erase an unpleasant memory, or maybe even conceal a scandal, or something that they felt that they just couldn't have known. That may be reasons. And so those omissions, those ripped off faces out of photographs, these are all little clues to get us going back and digging into other things that we have to see if it pieces the story together, as the diary did for the photograph. Now, if you've been a long time Genealogy Gems podcast listener, I hope you check out the podcast. Many years ago, I told the story of this quilt. And this was created by my great-grandfather. This is my father's grandmother. And she lived in Oklahoma, and Lenora Herring. And it was interesting because you got to go back. I should look up which episode it was. It was back in the 30s, like episode 31 or 39 or something. I don't remember. I'll have to put it in the show notes. It was an amazing story of genealogical serendipity, which I can't tell you now because it'll make me cry. But the end result was we found this quilt when my grandmother passed away, her daughter. And so attached to the quilt, pinned to it, was this note. And it says, "This quilt is for Ronald L. Moore, which was my father. It's the last quilt that his grandmother Herring made before her stroke and death. She loved him so much. I love you so very much, Ron, and I'm so proud of you as a son. All my love, Mother Moore." I love that she put Moore on it. My grandmother was not a family historian. And in fact, here are some things that I had to take into account when evaluating this quilt. So first of all, my grandmother did not live in Oklahoma since 1941. So she and my grandfather came out to Richmond, California to work at the Kaiser shipyards during World War II. She wasn't technically a Rosie the Riveter. She hired all the Rosie the Riveters. She was in the employment office, and that was her job, was to process all the workers and get them set up and hand out the handbooks. So the first thing I know is that my grandmother hadn't seen her mother for years, wasn't there when she passed away. So she might be drawing some conclusions. I also wonder if she actually got this directly from my great-grandmother or if it was passed down, I'm guessing, through her sister, Jewel. I think of her as Aunt Jewel. So Jewel lived with Lenora for many years, and so she would be much more likely to have it and to have passed it on and maybe to share this story. The other thing was interesting is that Lenora passed away, I want to say, I didn't look it up, but it was around 71 or so. If Carolyn, my cousin's watching, she'll know. But when she had a stroke, I think she went into a nursing home for a very short time, and she passed away. So I don't know, she's saying this was the last one that she made, but we don't know if that meant it was 2 years before. It could have been the 1940s. And why do I say the 1940s? Because as I went through and I inspected the quilt, item by item, piece by piece, literally, what I realized was some of these fabrics are the same fabrics that my grandmother Pauline had house dresses made out of back in the 1940s. So it was really logical that perhaps when she made the move around 1940 to California from Oklahoma, she might have taken some of the flour sack, fabric with her. And so you can see the dress in the middle, that some of those pieces are right there in the quilt. So in reality, there's a very good chance that this quilt could date back as far as 1930 to 1945. We certainly know the fabrics do. So many different things to ask and question. And sometimes I think in the family, people can say, why are you questioning everything? Well, because we don't know that chain of custody, and there's different clues that we can follow to help us piece the story back together. So I just love the fact these dresses are hanging, you can see, in my laundry room. And oh my gosh, I think I inherited about a dozen of these dresses at least, or more. And a couple of them have the fabric right out of the quilt. So it's even more precious to me now, and I'm thrilled to have it. And we can ask the question where the item has been, right? So I was thinking, well, did Pauline bring it with her when she came in 1940, right? Or was it given to her later, perhaps at the funeral in the 1960s? That could happen. So where the source has been kept over time and who possessed it, it's really an important part of this story that we're talking about. So for example, this camera that you're looking at, I was given this by my uncle a couple of years ago, and he was telling me that this, he knew, originally came from his mother, my grandmother Burkett. And so there was a very reliable, continuous chain of custody. My uncle has been such a cheerleader of passing on family items to me over the years. And he knows that, I'll document them. And he was asking me, can you see if you can get this film that's inside this camera developed? Wouldn't that be amazing? And it even had the original booklet with it as well. So I had lots of great information. I had firsthand account from my Uncle Buzz that he'd gotten it from his mother and that his mother had purchased the camera. So much to our delight, like I said, we discovered there was a roll of film in it and it was unexposed. So I started reaching out to photography shops, and I quickly learned that the film predated the current standard 35 millimeter film. So they couldn't process it. That was the first thing they looked at and said, no, I can't run this film for you. So did some Googling. Hey, if you watch the Google Lens episode, you could use your Google Lens with your phone and take a picture of the camera. It would probably tell you what kind of camera it was. This was a couple of years ago, so it was actually before Google Lens. But Google did lead me, based on some of the information off the camera itself and the instruction booklet. It helped me find a specialty store in another state that would be able to perhaps process the film. And it also gave me a website which revealed the camera type. It was a Kodak Senior 620. More importantly, it said it was produced between 1932 and 1937. So this is actually probably the camera, although no, the picture with the torn out face, if you looked at that, that was more like one of those photo booth pictures, don't you think? Yeah, the little ones. But this would have been the same time frame. And oh my gosh, I have tons of photographs from the 1930s, so I know she would have taken them with this camera. So the camera itself has a bit of history, much older than the film that it was using. So they told me this film type was C22. Now that can be dated as late as pre-1970s. And that made a lot of sense because my grandmother passed away in 1986. Just again, one more kind of verification that absolutely this could have been and probably was her camera. So of course, my hope is, fingers crossed, it's not been developed yet. It's amazing. They have to wait till they get enough of these types of rolls of film to be able to process it. But I can't wait to see the photos. Can you imagine? That will even give me more confirmation as to the ownership of it. And who knows, there may be pictures of me as a little kid in there. That could be. So if you have objects like this, if you have a quilt, if you have a camera, and you're a premium member, log in and go to the website under premium videos. So I want to alert you, this is where the archive is for the old episodes of Elevenses with Lisa, those early episodes, the first 10. And I want to alert you to episode 6. That one was the one we organized paper. So premium members can come in here, and if you scroll down, I did a control find for the word heirloom. It'll pop you down to the bottom section of this show notes page. And there you'll find a link where you can download a free, for you, template. It's a heirloom organizing template. It's part of a notebook we talked about and how to preserve your heirlooms and keep track of them and get the provenance of the items themselves. So click the download for this heirloom tracking binder template that we have. I also have an example for you of how I filled this out. It gives you an opportunity to add the photograph of the quilt, put in the description, right? The history of the item, where is it currently located, what was the chain of custody, and most importantly at the end, the directive, who would you like to give it to later. So you can go download this and save it and reproduce it. And if you're not a premium member, whisper in Santa's ear, because on our homepage, we now have this little picture and also on the premium membership page, let somebody you know who loves you that you'd like to be a premium member. You never know. Hey, it's an easy gift because there's no shipping, right? It's instantaneous for them to purchase. All right, so I hope you that's a little extra value for you as a premium member. Here's another question you should be asking, and is the document the original document? Whenever possible, you really want to look at the original. And I think a lot of people are getting kind of a little lazy on this point because we're looking at documents on websites, right? We're downloading digital documents. Now, a lot of times it's pretty reliable and we don't have to worry about it. But there are cases where you still want to go after the original if you can. So particularly in the case when you're finding indexes, you do a search, you get a result, and it's an index. Well, great, it's got the info you wanted, but you're not even getting a chance to look at the original page. Maybe it's a typed up copy of something, as in this example, or abstracts. They just might not be complete. They might not be 100% accurate every time something gets copied. My goodness. I mean, every time I create one of these PowerPoints, I'm copying information from my notes and I put a typo in there. So handwritten or typed copies of original older documents may have been made in the days before photocopying technology. And this was a great example of this because I did a search on Google. It found the Internet Archive, and I was looking for birth records in San Francisco. Now, the problem was in the 1906 earthquake, the courthouse was destroyed and a lot of the records destroyed. So my grandfather was born 2 months before the earthquake, or actually 2 months after. So there is no record because that thing was still in a shambles, right? There was nowhere to record it. So newspapers is critical. Google searching led me to the fact that the Internet Archive had transcriptions of 3 different San Francisco newspapers so that you could get birth information and death information. Fantastic. What's interesting is, look at the layers here. We're looking at a digitized copy of a typed up copy from the 1940s when a genealogist took this project on because they couldn't get the original records. So in 1940s, somebody sitting down and they're transcribing perhaps from the original newspaper, they're typing it up. Years later, Internet Archive is digitizing it. I mean, there's a lot of layers here. And it's certainly not complete. But the beauty of something like this is my clue. Don't stop here. Go find that original newspaper because they're also digitized and available. But finding it this way was so much faster. So indexes are great. Transcriptions are fantastic. But take that extra step and go look it up. Make sure that it was accurately typed up and transcribed. So this idea of, is this the original? So here's a digital copy of a 4-page family history. It was written by Sunny Morton, who was a longtime contributor here at Genealogy Gems. It's for her great aunt, Lena Hall. Now, she lived between 1903 and 1981. So Sunny received the copy from her mom, from Sunny's mom. And the title says, As Told By. And that kind of hints that this is a typed version of an oral history. So if it's an oral history, then that means that it's possible that it could have been taped, right? So there could be original audio tape versions that exist. Sometimes we see that with the WPA. We'll find a transcription of an interview, but many times if you work hard at it, you can find a digital MP3 audio file of the original audio interview and hear it for yourself as well. Make sure that this transcription is correct. Now, Sunny hasn't found an audio transcription, so in this case, this is really the best version she can work with, and that's okay, but keep it on your radar. Even if now it's not available, it might be in the future. There's so many wonderful digitization projects, or maybe you'll have an opportunity to visit the historical society or the archive in the area where this ancestor lived, and you might just be able to get a hold of the original. So keep it on your radar. Even, if you use Evernote or you have a tracking spreadsheet or something, this is a great way. Keep one that's just tracking those documents that, yes, I've taken them, I've extracted the information, but I really want to keep it on my radar that I want to look for it the next time I make it to that location. All right, so when was it written? Well, a note at the end of this document that Sunny has, it says, copied by a niece in 1987. So that was helpful. So it was created after 1950 because Aunt Lena's names that is the year that her father died. So even the contents of the story, of the interview, of the record, that is going to give you clues as well. It couldn't have been before this date, or it had to be after this date. Aunt Lena states that her parents now had, quote, 25 grandchildren, 58 great-grandchildren, and 4 great-great-grandchildren. So then the next step would be studying that complete family tree. You could probably narrow it right down and get a pretty accurate date on the original interview. So look for those clues that are built right in. So we ask, why was the record created? Okay, so some of that information we were looking at with the ancestry record for Harold Lloyd. This is Harold. If you scroll down, we found some background on the census. The tax lists are a great example of asking the question, why was the record created? So if you've ever worked with a tax list, and they're fantastic for genealogy research, we have to ask, was the government taxing real or personal property? Was it every household? Was it just adult males? They may include different property and different people. So a tax list on the surface, has its own information, but we have to go and dig into and find out what it was they were trying to document. And this is so true with so many of the records that we're working with. So why was the information provided? The original purpose of a source is highly relevant to really how much faith that you want to put in it. So an example of this might be a woman might have altered her testimony that's given in a divorce proceeding. So the divorce proceeding has recorded it exactly as she said it, but she, as the informant, as the person giving the information, has her own motivating factor. And she might want it to minimize a change because of her reputation or her future prospects. She doesn't want certain information to be out there and recorded. Newspaper articles may be filled with a variety of biases, as we know, by the author, the publisher, or those being interviewed. And this is true, of course, for media today, but it was true years and years ago in newspapers. We always, and as you can see in my little graphic here, that's a secondary source. That's the indicator that we're talking about something that may have been recorded later. It's hearsay, right? And then we have to ask the people who were even giving the information to the author, were they being completely honest and upfront? It begs the question, why do people do what they do? I love this. This is Harold Lloyd in Safety Last. Did you ever see that? Hair raising. It's hysterical. Okay, so why do the people do what they do? Well, let's talk about military records. This is one of his most famous movies, Grandma's Boy. I love this movie. Now, a man may have lied about his age or citizenship on a draft card, either to avoid military service or in order to be included despite being underage. It could go either way, right? I was looking up, doing some research on Harold Lloyd, looking at his draft record. Now, I know that he was born in 1893 in Nebraska. He says this in his autobiography. It's documented in the 1900 census. You pull up the World War I draft card, 1917. He should be about 24 years old. They say, do you have any reason for an exemption? And he says, yes, I'm supporting my father. And he talks a lot in his autobiography about that his dad had a hard time sometimes holding a job and changed jobs a lot. And he lived with him for many, many years when he went into the movie business. Well, look up above. He says his birthday is 1883. Should be 1893. So interesting when we see the flag of, oh, he's got a concern. He has an exemption. And of course, he's just got his movie career up and running and going. You don't want to stop in the middle of that, right, and go to war, let alone just going to war. So he, first of all, lists an exemption, and then it's very interesting that his age is off by 10 years. This would have made him, in the minds of the draft board, 34. And as a genealogist, what do we focus on first? Go straight to the birth year, look at all the notations. Well, actually, make sure that you're getting the full record, because here, this shows you the complete. What we were seeing was a digitized version that happened to be cut off on the side. He did say he was 24. So even in digital records, make sure that you can see everything to the outer edges. And if you can't, go look it up on one of the other genealogy giants websites we talk about, Family Search and MyHeritage and Ancestry and Find My Past, other ones that Google can bring you to. If for any reason the document looks kind of shaved off or distorted or a little difficult to read, go see. You might be able to find it in another genealogy record website. So he did say he was 24. But as a genealogist, I admit when I first looked at this particular document, I immediately spotted that 1883. And I thought, that's 10 years off. Now, we don't know the whole story here, but it's not surprising in a military record such as this. In fact, I went to pull up World War II just to compare. Maybe he just always had the wrong year. Nope, here he says April 20th of 1893. And it's really interesting. Remember the safety last when he's hanging off that clock? Well, it's interesting. Oh, sorry. If you look on the backside on page 2 of his World War II draft card, this is one of the only places you'll find him providing this information. That one of the issues he had at that time was that 2 fingers, his thumb and his index finger, were amputated from his right hand. He was filming an old silent movie, and they handed him a prop bomb. And there's pictures of this, and he's holding it, and he's supposed to be lighting a cigarette with the lit thing, and it turns out that it was real. And when he was having a hard time getting the shot, he moved it away, and that bomb went off. And he said it went straight up. It would have taken his face off, but instead it took off half of his hand. He wore a special glove, so you never saw it in all the films. You didn't see that he had a problem with his right hand. And in fact, he doesn't even mention that when he talks about the accident in his autobiography. But in World War II, on the draft card, that's one of the few places where you'll find him actually giving that information. So again, with any situation with our ancestor, It may be omitted quite often, but look for the right kinds of records where they have to maybe provide more complete information. And maybe there's a motivation here. Hey, I can't serve in any way, even though I'm older, because I also have this disability with my hand. So reliability of informants, we're talking about who's giving the information. It's the person supplying the information. Sometimes it's the same person who made the record, sometimes not. In the case of the census, this is interesting. The informant is the person in a household who told the census operator, the enumerator, what was going on in the house, who's there, how old they are, when they were born. In most cases, we don't get to know who that was. But did you know in the 1940 census, if you take a look for the X with the O around it. This indicates who's the informant in that household. Just kind of a neat little tidbit for the 1940 census. And in terms of reliability, a source may have multiple informants. This is really important. And it's each one has unique information and knowledge of the situation, as in this situation. So this is a death record. It's Mary Molly Overbay, and she was the grandmother of Margaret Linford, who's been on the show and has written for us. Informant number 1 is reported that this person is reporting the deceased's personal information. So probably a close relative. And in fact, it's John Overbay. So for this left side of the page where there's all this, who's the mother and the father and all that, this is all personal. Informant number 2 provides the medical particulars relating to the death. Now, typically on a death record, that would be the attending physician. So right there we can see that the same document can have multiple people with multiple motivations and different kinds of background and understanding of the situation. So if the informant shares the deceased's last name, then they're perhaps likely a relative, right? They likely had first-hand knowledge of the deceased's marital status, the spouse's name, their occupation. If we don't know the tree yet, and we might think, well, this John could be father or brother to this woman who passed away. And so they would likely have primary information. They would likely know, yes, where she was born, where, when, what her parents' names were. If the informant was the deceased's father, technically the information about the deceased's mother, his wife, like his wife's birthplace, that would kind of be secondary, wouldn't it? Because we have to presume that he wasn't there when she was born. So we want to go and verify particularly information like that. Her mother's maiden name, where she was born, this and stuff, and go track down those records that are more primary in nature. So this gets us into the realm of primary and secondary information. If the informant, which is number 2, the physician, was the deceased attending physician, he would have provided primary information about the deceased's immediate and contributing causes of death. He would have known. He would have checked her out personally. So what primary and secondary information is being revealed by the records that we're looking at? Historical evidence can either be considered primary or secondary, and Thomas Jones defines this in his book, Mastering Genealogical Proof, as primary information is that reported by an eyewitness. Primary information often was recorded soon after the event, but it may have been recorded or reported years later. Secondary information is reported by someone who obtained it from someone else. So basically, think of it as hearsay. So the important takeaway on this is oftentimes, as in genealogy, we hear about, is this a primary source? This is a secondary source, and it's that record. But the same document, the same record, can include both primary and secondary information. So think in terms of primary and secondary information as the information itself, instead of striving to just designate this source, this record is either primary or secondary. Okay, I think that's a really, really good frame of mind to have, and it's one that we don't tend to think about too much. How do all these clues add up? Well, it's clear that as genealogists, our goal is not only to evaluate each family history source, but also each piece of information that that source provides. Asking the right questions helps us ultimately answer the all-important question: how much do you trust what this record is telling you? And that, my friend, is something that you can do that's going to help you avoid problems if you learn the story of your records. I hope that helps, and I hope it's kind of refreshed you in terms of the genealogy that you maybe have already been doing. If you're new to genealogy, you might have heard some terms and some ideas here that are new to you, and I think they're just so critical to keep on the forefront of our mind. And I can see lots of folks in our chat sharing great tips as well. So really wonderful. I'm so glad you enjoyed it, Diane. Thank you so much. And I haven't heard from Mr. Cooke, so let me look and see if there's questions. Pull my little thing over here. Awesome. Fantastic conversation, you guys. I love it. It's funny, when I first started thinking about talking about this, I thought, well, it's not the most, sexy, glamorous topic in the world, but it's one that just permeates. It just hits all areas of everything that we're doing in terms of family history research, and it's going to make a big difference on how accurate things are. So, what have we got here? Oh, yes. Margaret, I saw Margaret was here today. She's going to be attending what I'm doing next, which is my webinar at the Mainline Genealogical Society. I'm looking forward to that. And I have a question for you. Did you notice I've got the Christmas thing going on? Have you read this book? Let's see if I can get this book. It probably looks backward on your screen. I'm guessing it might. It's called A Cup of Christmas Tea. Absolutely beautiful book. And I think ideal, of course, for Christmas, but also for us here at Elevenses with Lisa. And it's not just a story of a cup of tea, but it's also the story of the value of family and connections, and particularly intergenerational connections. And this is by the New York Times best-selling author, Tom Haig. He's out of Minnesota, and it's sold over 1.5 million copies. Super popular over the years. I keep seeing it in all the wonderful catalogs they keep sending me to buy stuff for Christmas. I am really, really happy to tell you that on Christmas Eve, Tom Haig is going to be on the show. And he's going to be my very special guest. He's going to be sharing kind of what prompted him to write this book, A Cup of Christmas Tea, what it's meant in his family, a little bit about his family history and how he's explored that as well. And just some important reminders that I think are so applicable in this year of 2020. I just think that you're really going to enjoy it. He's just a lovely, lovely man, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation, I think. So if you have an opportunity on Christmas Eve morning to join me, that's the Thursday. If you haven't gotten a copy of the book yet, his publisher has made a very special discount available. So if you want to get one, I think it's a wonderful gift for other people as well. Kind of helps spread the idea around the value of family and family history and why we do what we do, and the importance of talking to each other and staying connected. So it's published at tristanpublishing.com. You can put in the coupon code LISA. In the show notes, I'll have a link that'll actually do it for you automatically, and it'll give you 20% off the book. He's written, if you've heard about Peef the bear, the Peef books for kids, and there's a follow-up Christmas tea book. We're going to have a wonderful time on Christmas Eve morning, so I hope that you'll join me then. And did you notice I'm wearing my grandmother's necklace? I had to pull this sweater out because it's blingy and it's Christmas time, and then I said, this is my chance to wear Grandma's necklace. Wanted to wear it for you. Thank you so much for joining me here today. You join me here every week, and I love it. I hope you picked up some wonderful new tips, and they help make you a better genealogist. I know just putting it together for you helps make me a better genealogist, and that's a good thing for all of us. So until next time, thanks so much for watching, my friends. I'll talk to you soon.